In today's video, I'm going to show you how to take some of your quilting scraps and turn them into a fun, quick project. I am so excited to be sharing this video with you today, and it is all inspired by a quilt I found in a thrift shop. I was walking through a thrift shop and found this section that had all kinds of sewing supplies and things like that, and I saw over in the corner a stack of quilts. A lot of them were just the tops of quilts, but I found this one that is the wildest quilt I ever saw in person. It really caught my eye. And I thought, man, I would love to send this quilt to my friend Kris. She has a YouTube channel called Sew the Distance, and she has a whole series where she talks about old quilts. It's called Lessons from an Old Quilt, and I'm absolutely obsessed with that series. I can't wait until videos are released on it. I just find it fascinating. So I did. I packed up that quilt and sent it off to her to show on her channel. And then I thought, wow, I would love to make something that is inspired by that quilt. But I wanted it to be a quick project that people could feel is manageable to make. And I think I came up with a great idea for that. So we are going to make a tote bag today that is inspired by that quilt. And today also the video of Kris walking through the quilt is going to be up as well. So if you are here from her channel, thanks so much for stopping by. I hope you enjoy the project I'm going to be showing you today. And if you happen to find my video first, make sure after I walk you through this project, you head over to her channel and check out what she found out about this quilt that I sent her, the quilt that is inspiring this project. So let's get started on the project that I'm showing you today. Now, we are taking some scraps, of course. I got a whole bunch of scraps together, and then you're also going to need just a few other supplies. You're going to need the scraps, then you're going to need some scraps of batting, and I'll give you all the sizing here as well as on a blog post so you can find that easily. So you're going to need the scraps, some batting pieces, and you're also going to need some fabric for the handles and the accents on the bottom of the bag, as well as some fabric for the lining of the bag and for the sashing separating the scrappy panels on this bag. So let's get started with the tutorial for this bag. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do for this tote bag is work on the 4 panels that are going to make up the crazy aspect of this tote bag. So these panels are going to mimic all the crumbs of fabric that are pieced together to make up the quilt I found at the thrift shop. Now, I'm going to do that by sewing my pieces of fabric that I grabbed kind of in a quilt as you go manner. So I'm just going to grab 2 pieces, sew them together, flip them, and keep building onto it. Now, I cut these panels of batting a little bit larger than what I'll need for the quilt so that I can trim it down because it may stretch out and distort as I sew. So I wanted to make sure that I have a nice piece here to be able to cut from. So I cut mine to 7 by 11 inches, just to let you know. Now, I just threw a bunch of my crumbs of scraps here on a design board. So I'm just going to take this over to the sewing machine and start sewing the scraps on just however I grab them. My only thing I'm going to try to do is not put the same fabric right next to each other, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. Now, as I build out, I may sew like 2 pieces together first if I need to build up to a bigger piece to before I sew it on. So I'm just kind of going to go with the flow and see what seems to be working best as I build out the panel. So I have just one of the panels finished now, and I'm really loving the scrappy look. One thing that I did mess up was I got two of these fabrics right next to each other. And I honestly thought about pulling the seam out, because what I did was I built this row up by sewing all these pieces together, and I meant to sew it on the other direction. And after I sewed it and flipped it, I realized, oh no, I didn't get it turned right, and they're right next to each other. I decided not to pull it out though. I was like, you know what? I kind of like the zigzag look of them coming together. And what I'm also planning to do with all these panels is do some stitching on it by hand. I have all this lovely pearl thread here in a ton of different colors. So what I thought I would do is do some stitches across here to break up the two. I was already planning on doing stitching anyway, so it's just kind of something to think about when you're working on something, is if you mess it up, do you really need to pull that seam out? Sometimes you do, because it really matters for the block, the way it's facing, but for this one, I'm just trying to have fun with it. So be it, we'll make it work. So the hand stitching that I'm going to do on this is just kind of whatever I feel like doing. Maybe I'll do some X's, just work on some of my other embroidery stitches, and I'm going to do it before I put the bag together. So I'm not going to stitch through the lining of the bag or anything like that. I'm going to do it on these panels, and I'll show you some of the work I do, of course. To trim this, it's going to be 6.5 inches by 10.5 inches. And like I said, I cut it large. So because all my sides are kind of wonky here, I'm going to just kind of eyeball getting it straight. And it might be easier to even work from the back, because this is a little more squared up and I don't have so many haphazard edges. So I think I'm going to try to get this batting where it looks like it's lined up and straight on the 12 through here. I know you can't see that line, but like right here. And I think when I get one side straight, it'll be a lot easier for me to cut this. One thing that is nice is that this ruler here that I love is actually 6.5 inches wide. So if I line it up on here, I can, you know, trim that pretty nicely. So I want to make sure I have 10.5 free on both sides so that I know I'm not trimming it too much. So I'm going to square up that side. I got that side squared up. I need to change out my rotary blade. It's kind of getting dull. And then now I can, probably going to leave it by me because that was awkward cutting it that direction. Line up the 10.5 and I still have everything straight. I can see the 6.5 is still good on all sides, and then trim off this one last end. So there is my first scrappy panel for the bag body of this quilt. And I really think this is going to be fun. And it's also a fun way for me to work on a crazy quilt pattern like this, which is something way out of my comfort zone with all these wild colors and not trying to pair everything up. So I think when I get some stitches added on here and bring the rest of the bag together, it's going to be a fun way to use up my scraps. It should come together fairly quickly. Okay, so now I have 4 crazy quilt panels all finished for my scrappy tote bag. So now I have some stitching around the outside of all of my rectangles, and that'll just help me make sure I keep everything nice and in line when I sew the tote bag together. So I started putting some stitches on these panels. You can see I have some X's here. I have some X's across here and just some, you know, running stitches. So I'm just going to kind of put some different colors, different stitches wherever I feel like it would be fun to add some, just to add some more crazy and fun to these panels. Now, the nice thing about how these panels are constructed is that you don't really have to add any of these stitches or any of the quilting. So I'm going to work on adding some more stitches to all of these panels. I'm going to do a running stitch right across here, and I'm just going to go up and down. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to circle this rectangle or just do one line of stitches through there. Kind of just doing what I feel in the moment because this is a crazy quilt block. It's meant to be crazy. It doesn't have to, you know, look perfect. And that's the fun of practicing doing stitches like this on a project like this, because, you know, it's just a way to test different stitches, see how it looks, see how you like it. Because the whole point of this block is for it to be fun and crazy. So it looking perfect doesn't matter here in this instance. So I just went across there with a simple running stitch, and now I think I'm just going to add some X's on this side here. All right, so here are my 4 panels that I did all kinds of just some random stitching on, and they look so fun. They're just absolutely crazy. So the next step is we're going to bring these panels together. We're going to have 2 that are in the front of the bag and 2 that are in the back. And to bring them together, we're going to use these sashing strips. So there's going to be 3 for each side. 1 is going to go in the middle, and then 1 on the ends. So these are all going to get sewn together just in this order, and I really felt like these sashing strips would mimic the long random strips that are on the crazy quilt that Kris is showing you today. All right, I have both panels all sewn up, and just look at how nicely that batting just seams up right through there. So I was worried of it bending too much in the middle when it's all together in a tote bag. I'm not sure if it will, but something I can do is do a zigzag stitch through there, or one of the stitches that I've been doing here to keep it all together, or interfacing. I'm just going to kind of see, I don't know, see how I feel about it as I work on other parts of the bag. So there are both of my panels. I'm getting so excited about how this is going to look. Now, while I think on if I want to do something to really hold that seam together, I'm going to show you the next step on the bag. So I wanted a part of the bag, since this is all so crazy here, which is what I wanted, but I'm going to put kind of an accent piece on the bottom of the bag just to give the eye somewhere to rest. So I have these accent pieces cut for the front and the back, and then I also have some batting here because I want the thickness to match the crazy part of the quilt. So I'm going to baste the accent piece onto the batting, and then I'm just going to do some quick quilting on it just so it looks all beautiful. All right, so I'm going to mark some lines on here to follow, and I'm going to mark a line that's the same width of this panel, so at 4.5. You may not be able to see it too well on here because I can only find my red friction pen, of course. So then I'm going to start at the diagonal and draw a line down to that point I made. And then after that, the measuring is a little bit easier. So I have my line drawn. Hopefully you can see it enough. But I'm just going to draw 2-inch lines away from that first one I drew. In the other direction, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to draw a little mark that is at 4.5, and then do diagonal lines in the other direction, 2 inches apart as well. So then you see I kind of have a little checkerboard look going on. And once I get all those lines drawn, I'm going to put it on the batting and sew it. So it kind of has some quilting and is going to look really nice at the bottom of this bag. All right, so I'm going to trim this up. So we want it to be 4.5 inches by 14 inches. I'll be doing the same thing with the other one after I get that quilted as well. So I'm going to line up my 4.5 line with the bottom of the panel and trim one side. And then I'll do the same on the other. I'm going to line up the 4.5 all the way across there. And then now I'm going to keep one line lined up here and line up on the 14-inch line. Ooh, I'm a little bit off. So that is okay. I'm not going to stress about it. What I'm going to do is just leave a little bit of batting on the end and it'll all get caught in the seam allowance as long as I don't go past 1/4 inch. There, so I'm going to line up. So either my cutting was off or it got sucked in a little from the quilting. All right, so now remember we're going to make 2 of these. So I have one more I need to finish, but this will just get added on to the bottom of the bag. We just have the handles to make on the bag and then it's sewing everything together. So I'm going to clip this in place and sew a 1/4 inch seam and press it, and then we'll just have the bottom of the other side of the bag to prep, and then I'll show you the handles. All right, so here is one of my panels and it is all prepped and ready to go. You can see after I put the bottom accent of the bag on, I did do some top stitching across here. What that will do is help keep this seam secure and down so that it doesn't keep flipping up on you. Now, the last thing we have to prep for this bag before we bring it all together is the handle. So all of the cutting instructions, remember, are all on my blog post about this bag, so you can go there and grab all of the dimensions. Now, you do not have to use a piece of batting for the handle. I like to add it because if I put a lot of stuff in the bag, it makes the handle almost a little more padded so it's not digging into my shoulder as much. So that's why I like to add the batting. Now, I always make my handles the same way. I fold it in half once, and then I bring the raw edges into that fold line, and then fold it in again. That hides all of the raw edges. Now I will press this really well with heat to make sure it stays in place for me, but on this one, because I'm not using leather or something like that that's a little thicker, to add a little more structure and, like I said, padding to this, I put the batting inside and then it just tucks kind of inside of the handle, and then I'll top stitch along both sides, and it just makes it a little more thick and, like I said, padded. It really works wonder if I'm just using cotton fabric to make a handle. I really like doing it this way. Now, the dimensions that I gave on the batting leave it 1 inch wide. If you're finding that too difficult to tuck inside of your handle, because it is a very tight fit, just trim like 1/8 of an inch off, and that should make it fit a lot easier for you if you're finding it hard to fold it up inside. Now, here's how the handle will look after you do all the folding and top stitch along each side. It's just a nice, simple handle, and I matched it with the accent on the bottom of the bag, and I think it'll look really nice on here. So once you get the handles all set, you'll just want to baste it in place, laying down along the front of the bag. So you'll just baste it at the top. You kind of want to put it where it'll feel comfortable on you. I'm going to try to center mine right in the middle of my panels. I think that will look best. One thing to be sure about, because it's not fun picking stitches out if you don't notice until the very end of the bag, constructing the bag, is that you don't want to see any twists along this handle. You will not be able to get them out after you put all the bag together unless you want to pick the entire bag apart. So how that'll look is if it's kind of like this. You won't be able to undo that. So I like to just lay it out and just double check and make sure everything's nice and smooth. So I'm going to get the other handle all set up, and I'll baste these in place and show you the next steps to bringing this bag together. All right, so here you can see the handle is basted in place, and I have everything ready to go. It's all prepped on the bag. Here is what the back looks now that I put the interfacing on, and you can see that it moves a little more together and doesn't separate as much at that seam there. So I'm really happy with it. Something else I noticed was that the interfacing is going to help hold all those threads in place. So if I didn't tie them as well, at least they won't come undone now. And since I'm using such a light lining, I won't be able to see those threads on the background now. So I'm kind of happy with making that decision at this point. All right, so what we are going to do next is we are going to take the lining pieces and place them right sides together on the bag, just at the top where the handles are, and we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam across there. So we'll do that on both of the bags. So right sides together, clip it in place, and sew a 1/4 inch seam. So lay your tote bag out with one facing up towards you, and then take the other panel and match the sides. So you want your side that is going to be the outside of the bag facing together, and the lining facing right sides together. And what I like to do here is I like to mark on the lining somewhere where I want to leave an opening to flip the bag. So I want to leave, you know, at least enough space for my hand to fit through there and pull everything through. So I just mark somewhere so that when I get to it, I remember that is where I want to leave an opening to flip the bag. So line up your seams at the sides, and I like to use these hair clips that I got from Lauren Mormino's shop. She makes bags on YouTube, and I just thought these were so cute and fun. But this bag is all quilt cotton, so you can use straight pins if you want to. I probably will over here on the lining just because it is a lot lighter fabric, and these clips work best on thicker pieces of fabric. Now, one thing I like to do, and you will notice that the sizing of everything works for this, is at the bottom of my bag, I'm going to sew a 1/2 inch seam just at the bottom. Everywhere else I'm doing a 1/4 inch, but at the bottom I'm going to do a 1/2 inch just to really reinforce the bottom of the bag. I just really like to have a wider seam there because that's where all of the weight of all the items that you put in the bag are going to sit. So I really like to have that be a little wider of a seam allowance there. So once I sew all the way around the bag, I flip it around both ways and just look and make sure my seam caught everything before I even flip the bag, because sometimes you'll just notice that fabric shifted or something like that before even flipping the bag and notice that that's not going to work. There's going to be a hole. So I just do that first, and then when I see that everything looks like it was caught in a seam, then I'll flip the bag. So I just stick my hand through the hole and just start pushing everything through. So just push the bag out, and then you can make sure that everything looks good. Something I forgot to do, and I almost always do, because I'll line up, you know, the sides of the bag, and I'll forget that I have this accent down here that I don't line up, and you can see it's a little bit off because I didn't line it up. If you need that to line up perfectly, make sure you put some pins there to keep it lined up too. All right, so I'm gonna make sure everything looks good, and then you can box the bottom of this bag too if you want it to have some structure at the bottom of it, or you can leave it flat like this. So there's a couple things you can do to really finish off the bag and make it how you would really want it to look. I think I'm going to box the bottom of the bag on mine. This is a pretty wide panel, and I want the focus to be a little more on the scrappy area of it. So to do that, you're going to have to flip it back around. I'm sorry. Hopefully you watched this all through, and if you want to box the bottom, you didn't turn it all the way. But I like to turn it first, really just to see and make sure I caught everything and everything is looking good. And what we're going to do is on the bag exterior and on the lining, we are going to, I'm going to do an inch. So what we do here is, see how we kind of brought the bag together so the seam's going down the middle and kind of angled everything. I'm going to mark an inch in from the point there, and I'm just going to sew some stitches there and trim off, and that'll give us a nice boxed bottom of this bag. So I'm going to do that on the lining sides and the exterior. Now, one thing to remember is we sewed a 1/2 inch seam along the bottom of the bag. So you'll definitely want to make sure when you sew, your seam isn't turned in 2 different ways, because if we sew this side going the other way, we're going to have a turned seam here, and that you'll feel that on the bottom of the bag, and you probably don't want to. It won't be the worst thing in the world if I did it, which I have before. That's why I'm pointing it out. I don't change it. I just leave it because you know, it's just one of those things where it's like, it's annoying, but it's also not something I care enough about to change. So be it. I made the mistake, and so there's a little bit of a bulk in the seam there. That's fine. Now just trim off a 1/4 inch from those stitched lines on all of the corners. And then we'll flip the bag right side out, and I'm going to press at the top of the bag and along the open seam and sew them all closed. All right, so the boxing on the bag I think looks so good. It just helps shorten that accent just a little bit and gives the bag a little more shape. I'm so happy with how it turned out. Now to finish it off, I did a top stitch across the opening of the bag, and that gives it a nice finish look. It keeps everything all together around the top of the bag so the lining doesn't flip up. And then of course I closed the lining of the bag, so I just stitched across that opening. It really helps to press this seam first before stitching it. It helps everything get nice and crisp and hold in place. And the same with the top of the bag. Pressing it really helps it stay nice and flat so that you can sew around it if you wish to do so. So I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you are at this video first, be sure to go check out Kris's video showing the quilt that inspired this tote bag. So are you going to use up your scraps and make this bag? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.